I'd like to welcome you all to today's colloquium. I'm really excited to have really an old friend and a long-term colleague who's Malcolm Slaney, who's not just an unofficial colleague, but now is appointed as a affiliate professor of electrical engineering here at University of Washington, very recent appointment. Now, Malcolm Slaney is principal scientist of Microsoft Research's Conversational Systems Center in Mountain View, California. He's also a consulting professor at Stanford University. And among many, many other contributions he's made over the years, he's very well known for his IEEE book, Principles of Computerized Tomographic Imaging. This book was republished by SIAM, very well-known book, highly cited and used by a lot of people on a basis for that. And Malcolm will speak today on a very exciting topic, and looking forward to his talk on your attention, please. 3 studies of attention for modeling the cocktail party effect. Malcolm.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. And I'm hoping to spend more time at University of Washington. It's easy to get to Redmond, so Washington, here's just across the lake, and so that'll be fun. I want to talk about some stuff on attention that we've been doing. I'm trained as an electrical engineer, and I principally work as a modeler, so I try to model things, and mostly what I'm interested in modeling is human perception. But by way of introduction, I wanted to, okay, hold on. Technology is failing me. Oh, there. Oops, sorry. Sorry, my screens aren't in sync, so I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Okay, why can't I go to this slide? It shows up here, but not there. An important lesson I learned when I worked at Apple was that all computers suck, some more than others. I can't seem to get...
So it's updating there or not?
Let me start over. Hold on. Now the screen is... Oh, I see the problem. Okay. No, I think I had PowerPoint running twice, which didn't make it happy. So let me start over again. One copy will work better. So slideshow. Okay, there, now I'm set. Okay, so by way of introduction, I'm looking to spend more time here at Washington. And today's talk is about some work I've been doing in perception, which has been my long-term interest. But I've also been doing a bunch of other things over the years. I'm primarily an industrial researcher. I like working in industry. I like having access to data and real problems. But I've also always kept a foot in academia, so I've been running the hearing seminar at Stanford. And I'll talk about some of that work. But a lot of the work I've been doing has been in related areas. So I'm a EE by training. I've done a bunch of work on facial synthesis, so how do you synthesize talking faces, a system called Video Rewrite with Chris Pregler. As Les mentioned earlier, I did some work on tomography many years ago, so medical imaging has always been an interest. Les and I collaborated on some work that a student of mine did on demodulation. So we did some work on how do you formulate demodulation as an optimization problem. I think that's pretty fundamental and interesting work. A student of mine at Stanford did some work on chord recognition. So for a while, and actually I don't know what the status is now, but certainly for a couple years ago, we had the world's best chord recognizer that was done with machine learning methods, and it was quite nice. I've been doing some work on images, both for recognizing images with topic models with Reiner Lienhardt, and also, again, looking at things from the industrial side, trying to look at the web graph and do image classification. So this middle graph down here is showing some work that we did on recognizing images, and we determined the best way to figure out what the image was to look at its neighbors on the web. So ignore the image content, ignore the pixels, but we could tell what was going on from the neighbors. And then finally some work that I did at Yahoo, just finishing up earlier this year, or last year I guess now, on locality-sensitive hashing, and Alex Jaffe was one of the people that helped with that, who's here at Washington. But we had a lot of fun with that, and we think we understand that better than anybody else. So I'm interested in all these areas, and if you're interested in these sort of things, contact me, and I'd love to help you with these things. But today what I wanted to talk about was a more interesting problem, which is how do you perceive speech or how do you perceive sounds in complicated environments? And the classic way of describing this problem is the cocktail party effect. And in the cocktail party effect, you have this woman here feeding canapes to her friend, and she's paying attention to her friend or looking in the direction of her friend. But what she's really doing is listening to the person behind her who's talking about the latest gossip. And this is something we do all the time. I mean, well, maybe not exactly this. But, we live in a complicated auditory environment. And you're shifting your attention to try to understand things. And I'm really interested in how does this whole process work. And it's part of a bigger problem, which I think we've ignored. And I'm at fault in this regard, too, because I'm trained as an engineer. And as an engineer, you sort of work bottom up. You sort of say, well, here's the foundation. You build something on top of that, and you go up and up and up. And in the perceptual world, there's this dichotomy between information that's coming from the bottom up and information coming from the top down. And I want to start with this example, which I think is very illuminating. And let me play it, and you hear, and tell me what you hear. So hopefully this works.
The state governors met with their respective legislatures convening in the capital city.
Everybody heard that, right? Anybody hear anything funny about it? Yeah. So but first, everybody heard the sentence, right? The speech sounded normal. You didn't hear anything funny in the speech. Everybody heard the cough, right? Okay, so people that have heard this before, don't say anything, but raise your hand if you know what word the cough occurred in. Anybody raise their hands? So it's a really hard problem. There's one. It's a really hard problem because when you heard the speech and when you heard the cough, they're two different streams. And you're processing the speech as a stream, and this cough occurs and it's a different stream. And because they're two different streams, you really don't pay attention to where the relative timing is. And that's one of the principles of auditory scene analysis. But what's particularly interesting about this example is the speech wasn't normal. So I'm going to turn the volume up so it's a little easier to hear. But let me play you the speech signal.
The state governors met with their respective legislatures convening in the capital city.
There was a pause in the middle. There was nothing there. And you guys all heard it as a perfectly normal legislature. And so that's an example of the top-down processes in the brain filling in what's going on. And it's a really important problem and a really important process that's really fundamental to how we perceive the world. And if you treat the world as an engineering problem, like I grew up treating it, bottom up and all that kind of stuff, you'll completely miss this effect. So, in this case, we had, the legislature was chopped out, a cough was inserted in it, and there was enough energy in the cough that you heard it as a continuous word. It was sort of masked, is the psychophysical word for it all. And this gets back to the ideas, do you hear waveforms or do you hear ideas? And we'll talk about this in a little bit later, these waveform ideas, I dichotomy a little bit later. But the basic principle is, hallucinations are very important. You all hallucinated the word legislature and heard it as a perfectly normal word. And that's how the brain works, and we want to figure out how that works. And there's a big feedback loop, there's an attention loop, there's knowledge-based recognition. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we're trying to tease all that apart. And today's talk is an attempt to sort of frame the discussion and frame the technology around one part of that problem, which is attention. And so what I want to talk about are three topics on attention that I've been working on. Two of these were done at Telluride, the neuromorphic cognition workshop, and that's what's shown in the mountains on the right-hand side. First of all, building a system to do the cocktail party effect, and then some work that we just did a few months ago on recognizing attention or decoding attention with EEGs. And then some work that I've started at Yahoo and we're continuing on how do you estimate auditory salience. And I'll talk about what all this means in a few seconds. So the real-time cocktail party analyzer, I was one of three leaders, so this isn't all my work, and there's a large number of people involved in all this, and you can see a lot of names here. And it was really a group effort, so I do need to credit all these people, and the people in bold were the ones that contributed the most to it in terms of actual technology and stuff. So this is a summary of the problem that we're trying to solve. We have this guy in an audience, and he's paying attention to some speech coming in. And in our case, the speech is going to be numbers. So we have these two people speaking, and Les is going to have to pay attention to one side or the other. And they're going to speak these digit streams, and he's going to have to figure out, who has the highest value. So, what's your name says 58, 26, 34, and then the guy says his numbers, And he's sampling this conversation, trying to pick out the highest value. And this is a very nebulous concept because highest value might be, well, you want to find food, or you might want to find the latest gossip, or you might want to find the answers to the test tomorrow. So it's a very active process. And we wanted to simulate this process. And it's a very complicated process. I mean, it's definitely AI complete. And so our task was, how do you simplify it so we can actually talk about the problem? And we did it with these numbers and two-talkers and things like that. So this is the stimulus we used. These are spectrograms for the two speakers. And let me play you the examples, and so you can see what the problem it is. I should say that for native speakers of English, this is a very hard problem. And I don't know how well it'll reproduce in this environment with the reverb and stuff. But if, in reasonable environment, like an office or a classroom, you can do this if you're a native English speaker. If you're a non-native English speaker, I think you can do pretty well because it's just numbers. But it's definitely harder if you're not native. So let me play the example.
9,
5,
8,
4,
5, 2,
9, 8,
9,
5,
4,
2,
3, 4,
1, 2,
3, 2,
5, 4,
5,
5,
6,
2,
Just pay attention to the female.
5, 6,
3, 8,
5, 8,
5,
1,
4,
6,
9,
1,
4,
4,
1,
3,
4,
6.
3.
So you can do it, but it's hard. And that was our task. We wanted to simulate this process with real humans, and then build a computer model that could simulate the same effects. And we didn't quite make it in the time period we had, but we were able to do it after we finished, and it was a good project. But we had to. Oops, I think hold on. Yeah. So, okay. Once again, this is. Oh, here it is. Okay, why is it not letting me see ahead? Zoom slideshow, sorry about this. This is not new software. I should be able to do this. Zoom slideshow. Okay, sorry. So why do you want to model attention? And one of the reasons we did this experiment is we wanted to understand what we had. Most importantly, attention is helping you orient your effort toward a particular task. So in this case, this person wants to assemble a puzzle, and so all his attention is going toward the puzzle. You want to solve one particular problem. So that's one reason why attention is important. Another reason is that you have limited resources. So in a computer world, you can throw 2,000 servers at a problem and do everything. But in the real world, you don't. You only have one brain. You only have one phone with a limited amount of resources on the phone. And so you want to concentrate on what you can do, and so you have some performance limitations. So attention helps you limit what you can do so you can actually solve a problem. And the practical reason for doing all this is because we want to move away from close-talking microphones to a microphone sitting on a table here that we can talk to from a distance. And in a distance, there's multiple people talking. There's reverb, there's echoes, there's people moving around. There's a dog walking through the scene. So all these things are happening, and we want to make our systems work in that kind of environment. And so that's why this is important for a conversational system. So we had to punt in a number of ways to actually solve this problem. Mainly because we only had 3 weeks. I mean, this Telluride workshop is a 3-week workshop. It's very intense. We have a lot of really good people there, maybe 30 or 40 faculty, 30 or 40 or 50 students. And we have to get something done, and it takes a while to get started, and then we have to have everything done by Friday morning. And so we had to do a number of things to make it work. Most important, we limited the recognition to digits. And in fact, we only did fixed digits. So we had the same digit, we had 10 digits, but there was the same digit, same utterance every time. So we could use dynamic time warping to do the recognition. This is not a real limitation because you can do that. You can do real recognition, but in Telluride, that's what we could do, and it worked really well. A really hard problem is understanding information content in the signals. So I was joking about, the woman serving canopies to her friend, but listening to the gossip behind her. And she was in an information-seeking mode. She was trying to figure out what the most important information to her was. And we can't pretend to understand that, at least not yet. And so we abstracted the problem and said, well, instead of trying to figure out the relative value of food versus gossip, we're just going to say, recognize the digit string with the highest numerical value. So numerical value was an approximation of real information content. And so that was a simple way of abstracting that part. And then finally, we wanted to do this in a binaural real environment, and I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. But we couldn't get the binaural hearing system to work as well as we wanted. Our friend Barbara Shin Cunningham said it was easy. It turned out not to be easy. And so we just used a wire. So we just selected the left microphone and the right microphone. But all the pieces were there, and it was fun to do. So this is a system we built. We had two speakers saying speech utterances, and a person, or a simulated person in our case, in the middle, listening to both sound sources. It was going to a binaural receiver, shown in the center there. And then there was a bottom-up path and a top-down path. The bottom-up path was looking at things like saliency, so trying to say, okay, is this sound new and interesting? And if it is, then I need to shift my attention. And then there's a box at the top that's called cognition. And cognition is way overstated what this box is doing, but that was the idea. And it's trying to model the higher-level processes in the brain that are trying to switch attention around. And attention is switching and staying put based on a couple signals. So in the real system, in the real brain, you've got a task, like I'm hungry, or I'm looking for a date. And so that's driving your attention in this top-down approach. But then there's also things coming into your perceptual world that are important that change your attention. So maybe you smell something, and that might divert your attention. Or maybe someone makes a sound, and that diverts your attention. And so there's lots of things that are happening outside that come into your system, are salient in some sense, and are going up into the cognitive box. And so our model was trying to model all this. And we did that with what's shown here. On the left-hand side, there's an automatic speech recognition system, again, very simple, that's looking at one stream of digits. So we're not trying to do divided attention or anything like that. There's one stream of digits it's paying attention to. And the cognition box is saying, listen left or listen right. And then what the cognition box was being evaluated on was how well does its strategy how well does its strategy find the highest value? Does it find food? Does it find sex? Whatever it's looking for. In our case, just numbers. And we could look at how to build different kinds of cognitive boxes. So the goal of this is not to build the best cognitive box. Our goal was to show the whole system working as one system. And so we can talk about what it means. And if you disagree with part of this, raise your hand and we can talk about it. But we wanted to put a stake in the ground and say, well, this is how you build an attentional model. And this is what a cognitive panel analyzer looks like. And now we can talk about all the details. But this was our first attempt. And I think we were successful. So, I use two terms throughout this presentation in a slightly different form than some people use them. By salience, I mean a bottom-up signal that, this is salient. It's catching your attention. And that's a bottom-up. It's something that's perceptual and interesting, and your brain's going to decide whether to ignore it or not. And I'm using attention for the idea that top-down control only. So you're attending to something. This is a high-level process that's saying, I'm paying attention to food, or I'm paying attention to dates, or I'm paying attention to my test material. And so I'm using that only in a top-down process, a top-down mode. So I want to talk about all these boxes, and I'll talk a little bit about each one just to give you an idea of what they look like. But let's start with the binaural box. The Telluride Neuromorphic Workshop has a long history, and a lot of people that attend there, used to attend there, were building silicon models of neurons. So there's silicon retinas, and we're working with Shishi Liu, who does silicon cochleas. So we had a binaural cochlea in Telluride that does real-time sound in, cochlear model, auditory neurofibers, firings out. And so we could use that for this experiment. It's not fundamental, but it was there and we did it. So, and we use this to help determine where the sound was coming from, which direction, through a process known as cross-correlation. And the binaural cochlea is amazing because it works, but it's also not very accurate. I mean, it doesn't have enough channels. It's analog, so it has a bunch of variation. But it does do cross-correlation very well, and so we're able to use that. So the obligatory chip circuit is shown there. You don't have to understand it, but just to point out that there's these filters on top, half-wave rectifiers in the middle, which are implementing the hair cell the detectors, and then some AGCs that are shown on the bottom side. And it's all implemented in silicon. It all works at some level. But more important is what's shown on the right-hand side, where you're seeing red and blue dots from some, actually I forget what this was. It doesn't say. I think it might be speech. So there's speech going into this system, and the sound from the blue dots, which I guess is the right, is coming in before the red dots. So this is saying that the sound is closer to the right ear than the left ear, which is why the blue dots are showing up before the red dots in this picture. And so you can see, how the sound evolves, and you can see the red ear is responsive to a wider range of frequencies than the blue ear. So this is one of the problems with the analog system. But anyway, the system works, and you can see a very good correlation from cycle to cycle, where the blue dots precede the red dots by a certain amount. And so that's our signal we're going to use for doing cross-correlation and figuring out which direction it's coming from. Salience. Salience is a problem, and I'll talk about what I mean by salience in a second. We're hoping we can use some binaural models of salience. There's a couple of them out there, which we thought would be quite useful, but when we actually tried to do it with speech, they completely failed. These things were built with tones and built with psychoacoustic models, and as soon as you do something as complicated as speech, they went completely bonkers. Everything was salient, and it wasn't a useful signal, and so we had to do some different work. So the saliency models are modeled after some work that's been done in the visual world on visual salience. And so this is a slide from Laurent Edey and Christoph Koch more than 10 years ago, showing how their saliency model works. So what you're seeing on the top is a picture, and they have these 4 types of fields shown here: orientation, intensity, colors, and motion, whatever else might be going on. And essentially what they're doing is they're looking for activity that's new and novel, both in time and in space. And whenever something new is happening, either in time or space, they say that's salient, and that gives a signal out. So they combine all these different channels in a feature combiner at the bottom, and then what comes out is this picture here showing, for this particular static image, how salient are different parts of the image. And coincidentally, I think this is a bad example, but it's cute. Coincidentally, the most salient image, or most salient part of this image, is the money bag. And it's not because this model understands money. It's because it has the highest contrast, I guess, and that shows up as a salient image in this thing. So it's only modeled in low-level pixel stuff. It's completely ignoring the semantics. You look at this and see the dollar sign and say, "Oh, that's really semantically interesting. That's really cool." But this model ignores the semantics. It's just looking at the contrast. And Christoph Kaiser, who's I guess at the time, I think it was a postdoc in Germany, now in Canada, just did the obvious translation of that model into the auditory world. And so you're seeing his model here looking at intensity, frequency contrast across frequency vertically, and time contrast horizontally in the spectrogram. He built that up. And we applied this model to the auditory signals, speech signals, and everything got it excited. And we clearly need a better model, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is what was out there, and it didn't work. So instead what we did was we looked at binaural salience as a way of indicating attention. So what you're seeing here is real data from our cochlear chip. On the top plot, you're seeing as a function of time, 25 frames per second. You're seeing the activity in the left, as a function of space. So the vertical axis is space, and the horizontal axis is time. And you're seeing in these utterances I showed you at the start, the digits, first in the left, then the right, left, right, left, right. And you can see it back and forth. And the energy in a channel, in the localization channel, spatial channel, is shown in dark. It's a black symbol. So each black spot means there's energy from that direction at that time. And we just did the really simple thing for binaural salience, which was just to look for onsets. So in this bottom graph, you can see that each of these black marks corresponds to the start of one of the bands of energy on the top. So this one corresponds to that. That corresponds to that. There's not much one here because it's kind of slow. Here's one here. So you can see this is a signal that we can use to say, okay, something's interesting happening over there. Something's interesting happening over there. And it goes back and forth in this particular example. So this became our saliency signal. This is a signal that we wanted to send up to the brain, the cognition box, saying, pay attention in this direction. And then the brain has to decide, do I really want to change directions or stay where I am? The classic way of doing binaural models is just delay and add. Barbara, convinced us this would work. We tried it, and it didn't work at all, which I think is a sign that the binaural system is much more interesting, much more complicated than a simple delay and add microphone array system that we like to talk about in EEE. So this didn't work, and so that's why we just used a wire. We just used a switch. Pay attention to the left speaker, pay attention to the right microphone, and that worked for the purposes of our study. So I'm not going to play the examples in the interest of time. Recognition for single speakers is a pretty well understood problem. Again, we only had a few weeks, and so we just cheated in this respect and said, we're just going to do template matching. So we know the digits are 1 through 10, or 1 through 0. Was it 0? I don't remember if it was 0 or not. Anyway, on the order of 10 digits. It's very easy. They're all fixed digits, the same utterance played back and forth. And that part worked. But clearly speech recognition works at some level of performance. You can put more energy into that and do a better job. That's not the hard part of the problem. So the interesting part of the problem is this cognition box. And what it's trying to do is integrate the salient signal coming from below and whatever goal is happening from above and say, do I want to listen to the left side or listen to the right side? And it has to make a decision. And that's its whole goal, is to make a decision, directing attention. So we build lots of different kinds of models. The most realistic or the best model, best in quotes, was you switch the attention if something salient's happening, plus what you're listening to is not interesting. So, if your friend is droning on about, the conversation they had last night at the party when he was drunk, and then somebody opens the door over here, you're going to switch your attention because, this is not very interesting. This might be more interesting. And we're simulating the same thing here. In this case, if the first digit is less than 5, then it's very likely that the second digit, the combination is going to be less than, it has to be less than 50, right? So the model in this case is if you get something that's less than 50 to start with, go ahead and switch attention because maybe the next thing will be higher value. And again, this is the simplest possible model. We're not trying to say this is the best, because in a real model, you do things like, well, you know that Joan is always boring, but Les is always interesting. So, if Les starts speaking, you want to start listening to Les. So there's all sorts of other stuff going on to this attention signal that helps you decide what to listen to. But this at least gives you the framework, and let's just talk about it. So I can talk about some results. This is something we got working in real time, and I'll play you the results. And you can't possibly understand it from this point. I mean, I've looked at this hundreds of times. I still don't understand this image, so I'll show you a different way. But let me show you the real-time version. You hear the audio, and the arrow there shows what's listening to the male or the female speaker. The system's listening to male or female. And let me play it, and you can decide. Actually, I don't know if I can play video. Can I do this? Yeah.
9,
5,
8,
4,
5, 2,
9, 8,
9,
5,
4,
2,
3, 4,
1, 2,
3, 2,
5, 4,
5,
5,
6,
2,
1, 4,
5, 6,
3, 8,
5, 8,
5,
I can't
4,
listen to this. I
6,
can't
9,
figure it out.
4,
4,
1, 4,
3, 6,
3,
So-
8.
5, 8.
We had to find ways to abstract the results, and so we could actually talk about it. And the best way was it's shown here in the bottom. And this is one particular result, and I'll explain the whole system in a second again. But just to give you this one graph, you're seeing two different things on the same plot. The red and the blue dots show the last recognized digit. So in this case, at this point right here, it recognized a 9. And so there's a whole 9 here for a while. And then it got an 8. So at this point, the 8 was recognized and had 8 for this period. And then it got a 5 and a 2 and a 4 and a 3. And then at that point, something happened in the other ear that was salient. And the system said, well, I've only got a 3 here. There's something salient, so let's switch attention. And so we went from listening to the male to listening to the female at this point. So that's how we show the results. So this is what we call distracted. And in the distracted case, every time something salient happens, you switch attention. So it'd be like, if you wanted to be flippant about it, you call it the ADHD version. Anytime something happens, you switch, and you've seen it switch. Every time there's a salient event, which is shown in the middle here, you switch to the other side, and so that's why you get this very fine dark and light gray pattern, and it performs at some level of performance. And then what we called the smart approach was, as I described before, where you switch if it's less than 5. And so there you see much longer periods where it's paying attention to the same person. We have the obligatory performance graph. The smart version, approached 30% correct, and the distracted version got very close to 0 correct because it's always switching. And these particular numbers aren't important because, we're not very smart, actually. But we at least have the whole system we can talk about it, and we think that's good. And we did some modification.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is this human recognition?
No, this is machine recognition. And we never actually got around to doing the human task to show what it would be, but I'm not sure how important it is. And then if we modify it by saying you have to have some hysteresis, you can do better. It turns out that the experiment we did was very flawed because the sentences were too short. The sentence was only 2 digits long. And so you could guess and do pretty well. And so, the numbers aren't really important. But I did want to show, what the whole system looked like. As I said, this was a 3-week process. And actually, all the work got done in the last week. So we sat around at a bar in Telluride and scoped this out on a Friday afternoon over margaritas. And we built this whole thing in a week. Although we had, we obviously did our homework beforehand. We had binaural chips in silicon talking to a Java process that sent UDP packets to a Python process that did the saliency calculation. And the cognition box was implemented as a web server, which took HTML commands, CGI commands from the saliency detector. It took speech recognition results, and then made a decision, and then sent back a result via HTML to the speech recognition system. To the binaural system saying listen left or listen right. So this is running over 3 laptops with an amazing combination of languages, and it all worked in real time. So it was really quite fun to see. And if you've been to Telluride, it's a fairly ad hoc experimental setup. So I think this is the 3rd grade classroom at Telluride Elementary School. And we take over the class with, some pretty amazing people doing all sorts of neuromorphic engineering and computer science. The picture at the bottom here is showing the cochlear chip. And the 2 microphones are there. And you can see a array of laptops, and Trevor was helping set up and make all the programming work. And this is our experimental setup. And the data I showed you didn't come from this setup. We actually replicated this in Geneva, in Shishi's lab, to do the final experiment. But we actually prototyped all this and got it working in Telluride, and it was actually quite fun and amazing. And it's pretty heady. I mean, there's a lot of all-night. There's an awful lot of all-nighters that went on here to get to this process, but it was fun to do. So, this project is good. This project is good because I think it's nice to see the whole thing in one picture, but it's more important because it shows you where all the holes in the theory are. And the biggest hole in our theory, or our understanding of how the system works, was in saliency. And so I've been working with a gentleman, Vijay Mahadevan, who's a UCSD student who's now at Yahoo in Bangalore. And he's been doing some work on saliency models probabilistic saliency models. And he's been applying to the visual world. And we want to take that model and apply it to the auditory world. As a sideline, I should say, attention and saliency is important to people like Yahoo because the web is completely based on where your eyeballs are looking. And so if you have an ad over here that's waving at you and that catches your attention, that's important to know. And sometimes it does too much and it gets annoying, but sometimes it catches your attention and you pay attention to the ad and you click on it, and that makes people like Yahoo happy. But we're using the same ideas for doing auditory scene analysis and for cocktail parties. So this is Kaiser's model running that I mentioned before, with 3 signals, a tone, harmonic complex, and a noise thing. And what comes out is a signal here at the bottom. And you can barely see the signal from the tone. You get this humongous result from the harmonic complex. And the noise gives you something too. And it's not clear to me that this single tone is 1/10 as important as the harmonic complex. But in Kaiser's model, there's a big difference in them. but all that's changed is the timbre. And I don't want to criticize Christoph because he did an amazing job doing it and putting it all together and showing it work. And now we're showing all the places where it can be improved on. So this is the basic model. This is the state of the art, or close to state of the art. There's one modification. And it's not doing at all what we need to do for real sounds, and we want to do better. So, you apply speech to this sort of thing, it gets all upset and gets excited, and it's like, well, speech isn't that exciting. And so the model is definitely broken. So we did an Amazon Turk experiment to try to collect more data and get a better model. And the way we did this was to ask people to recognize spoken digits. And then this is the audio capture experiment. So if you try to create an account someplace like at Google or Yahoo, and you have a visual captcha, well, this is the auditory equivalent of that. And the background is reverse speech babble, and then we had these distractor sounds. And what we wanted to do was measure how distracting are these distractor sounds. So we're going to play these digit strings, and then we add a distracting sound. And let me see if these work. So this is an example. And the task is to recognize the digits.
4, 7, 4, 0, 0, 9, 4, 3.
So it's a non-trivial task, and the Turk was wonderful, and we got lots of data in a hurry, and now we're trying to model it and understand it.
2, 9, 7, 5, 7.
So you all heard the cat.
4.
So that one was salient, and we want to model that. So loudness is a big component of it. So we had loudness to normalize all these things. So what you're seeing in the green and the blue lines are two different loudness models of the sound, and want to normalize that out because loudness is a very important part of saliency, and we know how to model loudness. And so we want to model stuff that's different from loudness. So loudness is the first thing we do. Here's over the whole utterance what those curves look like. We thought that maybe, we thought that native versus non-native was important for this task. And so we actually asked the people on Turk whether they were native speaker of English or non-native speaker of English, thinking that we'd see a performance difference. And basically we saw the same kind of curve. I mean, there was no statistical difference between native and non-native speakers of English at this task. So I guess digits are easy enough, and Amazon Turk people speak English well enough that digits are universal at this point. So we didn't see anything with native versus non-native. And we wanted to measure this model of saliency by changing the background babble and measuring the recognition rates. And these are results, but they're plotted in a different way, in the sense that this is the performance difference that we can't explain with loudness. Or to put it another way, we've normalized all these sounds so they have equal loudness. And if loudness is the only predictor of salience, all these curves would be exactly at 0, right? At least all the same level. And we're seeing different distractors have different salience. And now what we want to try to do is model that. So we don't have the answer for this. This is work in progress. We're hoping that VJ's model will work. But we have this data, and if people are interested, we can talk and do more with it. So in the last 10 minutes, I want to talk about an experiment that we did this past summer in Telluride. Again, it's a very similar style in the sense that we only had 3 weeks, and we had to get something working. And what we really wanted to do was to use EEG as a way of decoding what people are attending to. And this has been done in other ways, but not with EEG. And I think it's really interesting. A lot of people have done experiments like this. This is shown with EEG, but people have done it with MEG and with fMRI. fMRI is the easiest. You put a picture of something in front of a people, and you measure the fMRI signal. And you put something else in front of them and measure the fMRI signal, and put something else and measure the fMRI signal. And you do all these measurements, you can build a model that says, if there's a dog, this is what the signal looks like. So the classic experiment in this is with fMRI, and you can put images in front of people, measure the fMRI signal, and then you can see what they're looking at. So in a sense, you're doing mind reading. And it's not really surprising that it works because a dog will excite different parts of our brain than food will. And at some level, you can do this. You might be able to tell the difference between this dog and another kind of dog, but at some level, you can do this, and it works. And people have done this with EEG, and again, this works. And what we wanted to do is with audio, which is a little bit different, but we wanted to do it with the attention signal instead. So now we're going to give people two stimuluses. And the persons can only attend to one or the other. I mean, the person's told, pick a signal and attend to it. And we want to tell which signal they're paying attention to, which is a much harder problem. So in this case, they're listening to two different stories. They're both going into the ears, either one ear to the other ear, or both to both ears. We're recording 32 channels of EEG. And from the EEG signal, we want to say, are you listening to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or listening to Journey to the Center of the Earth? So it's a mind reading with attention thing. And this has only been done a couple of times, and never with EEG. Our scientific goal was, actually I should say, let me go back. So this has been done very well by Nima Mascarani, who I should hire, who did it by cortical recordings. So they had epilepsy patients who were in the hospital, and they had an electrode array on their brain, on the cortex. They'd open the skull up, they put an electrode array on the brain, and these people are just waiting around for a seizure.
Do you happen to know where on the brain they had the
somewhere on the temporal lobe. And they included part of our auditory cortex, so they could do these experiments. And Nima says, they ask people if they can do this, and half the people are really grumpy and say, go away. And half the people say, well, I'm bored, so go ahead and do the experiment. But, it's not an easy experiment. They've got the brain open, they've got an electrode array, and there's blood everywhere and all that kind of stuff. But they've done the experiment, and Nima got great results, and I predicted it didn't work, and it did work, so I'm really happy for him. But they were able to determine which signal they were listening to from these surgical arrays, from the cortical arrays, which is really quite impressive. But they only have access to those particular electrode arrays. And what we wanted to do with EEG was be able to tell more about how the time course happened. Because I think the really interesting problem in attention is how is the signal represented, and where does it get lost in the brain? So when I'm talking and you're not listening to somebody else, you're only hearing my voice. And you're paying attention to my voice, and what's happening over here doesn't matter. Unless something happens, like someone mentions your name, and then that might switch your attention. So there's some sort of process going on. And I don't know what this looks like, but the blue signal is what you're attending to, and that's going all the way up into the brain. That's affecting your behavior and everything else. So that's really important. And at some other point, the red signal is getting killed off, and we don't know what that means. And we're hoping that the EEG signal, which has really great time resolution, and also has the whole brain, will help us decide how this process looks like. And so we don't have the answer yet, but we demonstrated that it's possible to get the data, and so we think that's fun. And we want to understand, in the simplest case, where does the unattended signal stop? But it's probably something much more complicated than that, and I don't even know how to think about that yet, but at least we're starting to get data. So Project Decode was the project we were doing. These two audio signals going in, we get these EEG signals, and we want to build a decoder. And the decoder's task is to look at the two signals, look at all the signals, decode it, and figure out what's being said. And so that's how we built it. There's a number of ways of doing the math. One way, this is Nima's experiment. And I can't go through it in the time, but there's a really great paper in Nature last year that talks about how this works and how they got the signal. And it's a really great experiment. Two speakers, decode the responses, and they could tell that they could tell which way the person is listening to. And they did it by reconstructing the waveform, which I think is the part that was amazing that it worked. Because this indicates that the brain, at this level of auditory cortex, still has a representation of the waveform. So when I played you the legislature example earlier, you all heard the word legislature is a perfectly normal word. But I'm pretty sure you didn't do that by keeping the waveform for legislature in your brain the whole time, because the middle part was empty. So you recognize the high-level concept of legislature, and you can play back the word in your brain, but the waveform wasn't there. And so this is sort of getting at the problem. This is an issue that I'm hoping Nima will address. There's a couple of different ways of building decoder. The canonical correlation approach is this very wonderful math that takes the audio and the EEG and figures out a warping, a mapping that allows you to get the maximum correlation. We could use that to build a decoder. I'll talk about performance in a second. A better way of doing it is a system identification problem. So we have audio and EEG going in and out. We want to build an impulse response. This is a double E way of thinking about the problem. We can do it in the Fourier domain, so it's really easy to think about it as a multiplicative, Fourier transform. And then once we have the system, we can invert it. And given an output, EEG, we can predict what the audio was at some level of performance. This is the single channel version showing how that works. So you can write the math. And in terms of correlation matrices, RxX and RxY, you can solve for this, build a model, and it all works. This is, again, being done channel by channel at this point. And then the better approach, I'm sorry. I left out a slide. But anyway, a better approach is to do this on all channels at once. So we call that the optimal approach. But this is the kind of results we get. And the way we did the experiment is we recorded 20 minutes of speech in 1-minute segments. And we built a model of how they perceive the sound. And we could predict the accuracy and, more importantly, the correlation. So these correlations are really, really low. I mean, it's a really hard problem. But if you do this over enough seconds, you can make a pretty good estimate of what's going on. So, over 1-minute periods, we could predict left to right with 90% accuracy, but the correlations are low, so we need a lot of data to get the correlations up. This is on a frame-by-frame basis. It's low correlation. These are the final results with the real system. Depending on how much speech we have, with CCA, 65 to 85%, one channel, the same sort of thing. And with all the channels, we can get pretty well. This is how it changes over time. So with only 10 seconds, we're above chance, but not very much. And by the time we get to 60 seconds, we're close to 95% accuracy. So again, this is listening to speakers, using the EEG to pick which side the person's listening to. And then there's the kind of correlations you get. There's a whole range of different correlations you get for different kinds of utterances. The impulse responses. I think this is going backward in time. So in this case, 4 and 26 were really important, and 29 was kind of important with longer time scale. There's our subject again in the classroom, checking his email. And those are the electrodes that were most important for making the classifier. This is a video of I'll show you the video. This is a video of the system. And we had an acoustic microphone array, a spherical microphone array for gathering the sound, again, because we happened to have it. And here's the demo. And what you're going to see are there's 2 speakers, green and red. And then we'll put a box around where we think the person's attending to. And for the first 30 seconds, you don't get very good data. And then it sort of locks on. And I can find my mouse. There it is.
Red Ringo, Chapter 6, just before 7 on Wednesday morning, Ivy was already dressed for school in a jagged black skirt, a dark red top, and a black crocheted sweater. She hastily grabbed a bowl from the cupboard, dumped some marshmallow platelets in it, and pulled the milk from the fridge. She plunked it all down on the breakfast table and switched on the TV, just in time to catch the opening Spencer before it stopped.
And there's a paper in process right now for this. We're talking about ARO next month, and there's a paper that goes through all the science and talks about this in more detail. So again, this is kind of like a pilot experiment, but we actually showed it work. And we're pretty pleased with ourselves for doing this. So I talked about a bunch of different things, and we didn't solve any of the problems, really. But I hope we gave enough of a framework we can talk about things. Attention being this top-down signal, saliency being this bottom-up signal, putting it all together as a loop, because that's how the cocktail party effect is working, and then using an EEG signal to start to decode it. And I'm here because we think this is a really interesting problem. It's obviously important to people like Microsoft, but there's a lot of good science possibilities here. And if you're interested in working on this, let me know, or any of the problems we talked about, because there's plenty of things to do in the future on this. So I want to thank you, and I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. Thanks.
Well, I know some of you have to run to other classes, and go ahead if you have to, but if not, we have time for a few questions. Any questions?
Has anybody looked at doing this project process on a music signal where there's a melody and other noise?
There was actually a NIPS workshop a few years ago where we said music was the ideal cocktail party because you could tune the complexity. You know, there's really simple, like here's a melody and here's a whole orchestra and everything in between. It's possible. The information content's harder to determine with music than it is with speech, but it's a quite wonderful idea to do. So the answer is no, no one's done it. The second part of the answer is yes, they should do it. And I think it would be interesting. It has some unique challenges.
Question all the way back.
The frequencies that people track in EEGs are usually lower than speech frequencies.
Yes.
So when you say they're correlating, what was correlating? Was it the envelope or what?
The easy answer is I don't know. The probable answer is envelope. So we were actually correlating with, actually I don't remember what we actually used in the system. It was either MFCC or Mel frequency filter bank coefficients. I think it was actually a Mel frequency spectrogram, so 40-channel spectrogram, and correlating that with EEG. And so you're basically picking up spectral modulations over time. But as you point out, it's a very low frequency envelope, and that's all you get. So we're not getting pitch information from this, for example, but we can sort of tell the pattern of speech. And that's a really good point, and I need to make sure that we talk about that in the paper that's coming out. I haven't seen the draft yet, so when I do, I'll make sure we include some things about that. Good question.
So I know you guys haven't done any semantic processing yet, but in your opinion, do you have any idea about how much of saliency comes from semantics and how much of it comes from properties inherent in the signal? So for example, if someone says my name, I'm going to probably respond to that even if there's a loud signal over here.
I was going to ask an easier question. So the question is about semantics. I don't know the answer to that. I'm a lowly engineer. I think the flippant answer is that the cognitive psychologists are better to answer that. I know it in my lab. We want to do conversational speech, and so, what's salient to the system or what the system should be paying attention to is going to be determined by the task in the game or whatever's going on, and so we'll probably have some application-dependent saliency at that point. But we haven't built anything, so I don't have a good idea. So it's an area ripe for future research if you're looking for a thesis topic.
How much and if so, what type of prior information is being incorporated into the modern measures of saliency?
None.
None at all.
But they should be. There's nothing at all in there, and that's part of the reason. One of the reasons I like Vijay's model. So Vijay works with Nuno Vasconcelos at UCSD, and their model is this idea that if this is happening, and then all of a sudden there's this little thing here that starts, then that's salient because it's different from the background. But it's also salient if I start talking in Polish, because you guys all know what English sounds like, and then all of a sudden Polish starts, then it's salient for different reasons. So saliency is based a lot on prior expectations, and that's the nature of the beast. And the bigger problem is how do you model this information-seeking mode? So when I was working at Yahoo, we spent a lot of time thinking about information-seeking, and you're on the website and you're doing some task, and you're looking for information, and so you're saying, well, I'm going to go in this path, and I see some information here, then I'll take in this other direction, and there's this active process going on in web search or web browsing, and exactly the same thing's happening in the cocktail party effect. You're sampling the environment, saying, here's the person in front of me talking about the vacation, but I know Joni's going to talk about yummy food, so I should find out when that's coming out. And so your prior expectations are completely part of all this, and we completely ignore it all. I mean, speech recognizers include language models that have bigram models or trigram models that say what words are most likely, and that's as sophisticated as we get. And we need a lot more, and there's a lot of room for improvement there. The very simplest thing you want to do is, in a cocktail party, you probably want to pay attention to your wife's voice more than somebody else's. And so that should be more salient to you if you want to live to the next day. So, there's a lot of priors going on there, and, we need to start, elucidating those and figuring out what they are and working with them. But, I think we've made progress because you can at least ask the question now. Anything else?
Okay, well, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you.
Malcolm.